Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And up next, we discuss everything you need to know about interval workouts, what they do for us, and how best to achieve it. After that, World of Running updates about London Marathon, Twin Cities, and more. Hey, if you missed it last week, it was our end-of-month Q&A episode where we answer your questions.
Riveting conversation.
Riveting. Look at that. Great questions, and always appreciate them. So now we are gearing up for the next one at the end of the month. And if you've got questions and you would like them answered or addressed on air, or maybe even if you don't want them answered or addressed on air, but you want to ask them anyway, and then we'll just answer them anyway.
To you, personally. Or you can do it anonymously.
Or if you have,
Mm-hmm.
If you have questions, we would love to hear them and share our thoughts if they can be helpful to you. Go to AtoZrunning.com/question.
And we last week brought up that Berlin Marathon was in the middle of the night for the live broadcasting. It was at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I asked if anyone was up watching at 3 a.m. And Shawana is a major track and field fan. She and I connect over it, and she said she was up at 3 a.m. watching. She's a school teacher and also is training a lot too. So that was a huge sacrifice of sleep, and I just love her enthusiasm for the sport too. So it was fun to connect with her over that. She's also a previous podcast guest. Yeah, so
big commitment.
Yeah.
All around good stuff. And since marathon season is upon us, we're just looking forward to that much more about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, there has been a lot of conversation about ways that we can keep safe on the run. And so I reached out to She's Birdie. And it's an alarm system that you carry on your person. It's small and it's really, really loud. So I was looking into it
loud
because a lot of the places that I work will not allow for weapons in the workplace. So like walking to work.
That's fair. That's reasonable.
Well, even like mace, even like personal protection stuff. So I was looking into this because this is allowed. So I wanted to share the code. I reached out to them and asked for a code for our listeners because a lot of us have been looking into how we can stay safer. And that's A to Z 15, ATOZ 15 for 15% off. And that's She's Birdie. So I will link to that at AtoZrunning.com.
Bonus, even if it's not for self-defense or protection purposes, it makes for a great gag making that thing go off when someone's not
don't do that.
expecting
That
it.
is really dangerous.
It would be
Zach,
funny to
that's
wake
not funny.
up your
It's
friend
not funny.
with that
Not funny.
alarm.
Nope. Emergencies aren't funny. And
I'm not talking about
pretending
an
there
emergency.
is one
I'm
is
talking
also
about
not funny.
sounding that alarm when someone's sleeping would shock them to their core.
We have a junior higher on the show today. Junior high.
Andy thinks this is a very serious
It
moment.
is a serious thing to stay safe. So,
I'm not talking about that not being serious. I'm talking about it can also be funny to make loud noises when people don't
because then
expect
it's less effective for when you do need the alarm to go off.
This
it's
is
like
totally not
the
a boy
kid who
cries
cried.
wolf. No, it's not a boy who cried wolf situation, Andy, because no one's pretending like they're in grave harm by waking up their friend who's napping with an alarm. Oh, by the way, speaking of awesome things to do, you may have noticed, if you're watching right now, that we are wearing the most incredible shirts you have ever seen. And that, in fact, is especially great because you can also be wearing the most incredible shirts you have ever seen. Because the A to Z Running merch shop is live.
Woo!
It is available to you. We're working on getting all like the photos up to date and everything. So, depending on when you visit the shop and try to see what's what, you might not see all of the photos yet for all of the items, but that will be happening soon. And all you need to do right now to take full advantage of this great opportunity is go to AtoZrunning.com/shop. Or if you're just on the website anywhere, look for the word shop. It'll be in the top in the navigation. And then while you do it, you can find the coolest shirts on the planet and get some for your friends and your family and just let everybody know how awesome you are by giving them such a great gift.
Give me a couple days to get those photos up, Zach.
You're
like, hey, we're launching it. But there's no photos.
Golden.
There's no photos up yet. So
there will be.
There will be by Friday. I'm
that's
putting a deadline on myself.
Who knows when people are listening to this?
That's true.
But the first and most important thing that we're going to say about it is stock is limited.
Very.
Inventory is limited. And we will order more if we run out, but we may, in fact, run out of sizes quickly. So if it's something you want to take advantage of, sooner is better than later.
All right. Nice plug. All right, let's get on to our main topic.
So we recently, well, actually it wasn't that recent now. My memory evades me. But we once spoke about the fartlek workout.
Yeah.
And at length trying to help you understand what a fartlek is and how to implement those things successfully. And it was well received. And the thought occurred to us that there are other workout types that are sometimes misconstrued or at a minimum can be implemented more effectively than they often are. And maybe it would be conducive to discuss some of those as well.
Yeah.
And the next one in line, if there's a next one in line, it's a toss-up for me between this and something else. But we'll go with this for now. That is most often misapplied, or maybe not misapplied, but not as effectively applied as it should be.
Get to the point, Zach.
Is intervals. Interval workouts. And so what we want to do here is we want to help you understand what an interval workout is doing, what it's supposed to be doing, and how best to achieve that, and whether or not the interval workout is the right choice in a given moment. Right?
Yep.
Okay, so first, what's the difference between an interval workout and a repeat workout? I once heard someone criticizing a coach who was doing repeats and said they need to be doing more intervals. And the thought that first struck me was, what's the difference? And in reality, there is no real true difference between repeats and intervals.
Well, maybe somebody has,
because someone
different...
probably is describing them differently, but most people are using those terms interchangeably. The only time that I have heard people try to express a difference is where they talk about the nature of what they're doing for rest periods, or like an interval is a very specific orientation of a repeat of some kind of workout. And so I guess I can understand that. Fartleks are a type of repeat workout. Intervals are a type of repeat workout. I mean, really, anytime you do multiple things in a workout more than once, it's a repeat workout.
Well, that's why you get like hill repeats.
Right. So we're going to assume the difference and describe them all is the same thing. We're calling interval workouts any kind of workout where we're doing specific targeted repeats.
It's a lap, it's a lap, it's a lap, lap, lap.
Okay.
It's a lap and a lap and a lap, lap, lap.
You never told me you were going to do that.
And that was poor. I actually can sing. That was wrong though. That was out of tune.
That's okay. That's what it usually sounds like anyway. So I'm kidding.
Jerk.
I'm kidding. All right. Okay. So an interval workout is, in essence, it's repeating some kind of pattern. Usually at higher levels of intensity. And so where we cross the line here in terms of like a lot of different types of things is we're going to talk about an interval workout is of increased effort repeats. Okay. So now, in essence, you're going to have a hard period and you're going to have a rest period. And we will always argue, this isn't necessarily something we're going to dwell on in this moment, we'll always argue that for a runner who is anything more than a sprinter, that your rest period should be jogging, should be active. If you want to gain more from the experience, you should be jogging the rest. And the only argument that we ever hear in opposition to that is that I don't recover enough while I'm jogging, my heart rate doesn't recover enough, and I can't go quite as hard. And my answer to you is, then don't go quite as hard, because you should be jogging. And so that's the first thought. Also, there's a comment here where, well, if I can't go quite as hard because of my heart rate's not recovering enough, then the polarity between the jog and the hard effort isn't quite enough. And so then we do different things with the interval workout to achieve that polarity better, so that the hard effort is higher and the jog effort is substantially lower. Okay, so there's a number of different things involved there, and we'll get to some of that here in a minute. So how about why do we do interval workouts? Like, what do those things accomplish for us? In other words, what's the purpose of an interval workout?
You can tell us more than one purpose?
There are 3 purposes.
Good.
So interval workouts, by their very nature, are designed to be more intense. That's the goal there. And so where they may be intense enough, they can be anaerobic in nature. And so you're exercising your anaerobic energy system. That's one possible purpose. Most interval workouts for most runners are, in fact, however, not anaerobic. Right. Because of the way people are running them and because of the way they're supposed to be running them depending on the workout. So they can be, but that's actually not a very common thing. What does it take?
For distance runners.
Yeah, for distance runners. I mean, really for anyone, because what does it take to have an anaerobic workout is a really serious amount of intensity and using rest in the right way so that you're not resting too much. A truly anaerobic workout should be very short. And so if you hear someone's talking about like doing 20 by 400 meter repeats and they're saying that's anaerobic, it very likely is not, because it would be very difficult to truly run a fully anaerobic workout for 20 repetitions of 400 meters. However, there are workouts, and we'll get to a couple examples here, that would be anaerobic by nature. So that's one possible purpose. The next, and the more common one, and in fact, this is almost always going to be the case, the reason why most people are going to do an interval workout and should at some point or another is for the increased leg strength. And specifically, that leg strength is coming from an increase in muscle recruitment, in muscle fiber recruitment. So why is an interval workout different than a long, steady run, than fartleks of various natures? Is because you're specifically trying to recruit more muscle fibers than what you normally are using in some of that other stuff. So by nature, the interval workout is a contrast to some other dynamics you might be doing in training. We'll come back to that also. Okay, and the third one, and the last one for our lists of why you do interval workouts, I'll hedge in a moment. It's neuromuscular by nature, because increased neuromuscular activity, I should say, than other things that you're doing in training. So similar to the muscle recruitment, which is an aspect of the neuromuscular piece in the puzzle, but you're also looking at potentially like increasing maximum contraction and power in your muscles, also looking at increasing just the degree of running economy and efficiency involved in your training. So all of those things are present as a possible purpose, and many of them are all happening at once, depending on the interval workout you're doing. Now, here's my hedge. There's a number of other reasons that coaches use interval workouts for runners that fall into more specific goals categories. Like I'm trying to train my runners for a certain type of race because they need to be able to win this race, but it's not going to be a normal type of race. You know, you have like even efforts, but you also have like sit and kick races, or you have like some strategies.
So yeah, strategic, but also a mental piece of it. It's like a rehearsal.
Can be.
It's rehearsing. Yeah.
So there's a lot of instances where someone's going to have an interval workout in their schedule for a reason that isn't necessarily fitness building only. Okay. We're not including those in our conversation right now because it's like infinite. But it's also fun and exciting. All right. So now this is the fun part. Now let's try to put this into context, because what we want to try to do here is break down basically if you're doing these types of workouts, when and how should you be doing them in a way that is most effective and efficient in terms of training. And so in order to describe that, we're going to share what the most common types of interval workouts may be that most of us are doing at some point or another. And then I'm just going to shoot them all down.
Zach.
And criticize.
So before this episode, I was like, you may not be harsh about this because there are different schools of thought, but Zach is going to tell you why he's right. So
saying that
get
Zach
ready.
shouldn't be harsh about something is like saying, Zach, now you may not exhale after you take in a breath.
Oh,
How long
I'm supposed
can it
to
go?
soften you. That's my job.
Okay. What's the first one, Andy?
The first one is mile repeats. How many should you do? 4, 5, 8, 10 mile repeats?
Well, I'm a marathoner, so I should do 26 mile repeats.
Oh, yeah?
Right?
That's a joke.
That's a joke. So I don't know, but our point here is we're trying to anticipate what you might be doing if you're doing a mile repeat workout. And it seems like you're probably doing somewhere around 5 to 8 repeats because you're a distance runner, and that's what most distance runners are doing with mile repeats. And you're probably running them half marathon-ish type of pace or effort in that vicinity. So now, that being the case, what is a mile repeat workout supposed to be doing for us differently than other types of workouts? And is that, in fact, the best way to do it? So in general, if you're running repeats that are longer, then we're not talking about, it's not anaerobic at all. Well, I guess it could be, but it shouldn't be. If you're doing 5 or more mile repeats, you shouldn't be running them anaerobically. So you're doing repeats that are strong effort, and so there's certainly a leg strength component to it. And there's possibly an additional neuromuscular aspect, but in essence, most people are not running mile repeats hard enough for the neuromuscular activity to be all that much different than if they're doing steadier tempo types of runs, sustained effort, steadier tempo runs. So mile repeats are usually just a little bit of an increased leg strength stimulus in most instances. Which begs the question, is it the most effective way to get that increased leg strength stimulus potentially? And in general, the answer to that is not likely because mile repeats don't necessarily give you a training stimulus that's all that much different, if not different at all, than something like a sustained tempo effort type of run. And the sustained tempo effort type of run is almost always going to be a more effective training stimulus for those types of things. Almost always.
And you're more likely to overdo it in mile repeats.
In fact, you are, because it's just easier, because you have the rest period, so you can go that much harder. However, going that much harder for long repeats can be very risky. Going too hard. So there's a consideration there. So that's not to suggest that mile repeats are never something that a runner should do. But there's a way of going about long repeats like that can be highly effective, where mile repeats are only mildly effective for achieving the type of training stimulus, the leg strength, muscle recruitment thing you're looking for.
I think often coaches will put in mile repeats to give variety to someone's schedule.
Yeah.
And not necessarily because it's better than steady, but because their athletes want something different.
So there's always a question here, and this is which direction I tend here, which is like
efficiency.
Who cares that you want something different? You need to do the thing that's the most likely to help you achieve your goals, right? However, the balance to that, which is actually in fact central to the work that we do with our athletes, is that it really doesn't matter if you're doing the best possible training if it's making you miserable or you're just not flourishing, you're not thriving in that. So do we often look for alternative workouts to achieve a similar goal to something that's not going well? Yes. In which case, a mile repeat and longer repeats in general are highly valuable when you're having a hard time focusing well enough to execute these longer sustained hard efforts. And it's just you're not putting the pieces together, and when you do it, it doesn't go well, and you're miserable and things like that. We can use mile repeats to get the same training stimulus. We just have to be careful that we don't replace all our sustained hard efforts with mile repeats, because chances are you're running a race that's going to involve the need for a sustained hard effort.
Yeah. And your focus, we've discussed this on the podcast, your focus is something that you're also developing. And we give ideas of how to help you cultivate your focus for racing in other episodes as well. So I just want to put that out there, that it is important to be able to focus.
Truth.
For some of us, it doesn't come as naturally as with others.
Truth.
Yes.
So let's talk about 800-meter repeats,
Okay.
half-mile repeats, or some vicinity of that. That's another one that you see a lot of people doing. And at this point, let me just simply say there's basically two categories of repeats in terms of interval workouts that are common. One is longer repeats and one is shorter repeats. And there's a line between the two that's very arbitrary. There's not a specific distance where suddenly it's shorter and suddenly it's longer. But I would include 800-meter repeats in the longer category. And so as a consequence, everything we just said about mile repeats is largely the same about 800-meter repeats. It's still a long type of interval. You're still mostly looking at leg strength component. There is an increased neuromuscular activity component because chances are you're going a little bit faster, and so the degree of activity is a little bit higher. There's also a greater potential for an anaerobic workout now. 800-meter repeats is actually one that is one of the easiest workouts to fulfill an anaerobic energy system development because of the nature of that distance, and it's easy to run hard enough now to be anaerobic and not so hard that you're just dying like in mile repeats if you're going too hard. So 800s are interesting. They're a little bit more flexible for that nature. One thing to think about is the most common marathon use of 800s is popularized by Runner's World as those Yasso 800s. I think that's how you say it. Is Yasso a person or an idea? I've always wondered that. I think it's a person.
You could just look that up.
Yeah, I could, but that would take time. So the thing about Yasso 800s that's important to remember is that workout by design is used or leveraged as a kind of like race predictor type of thing. So whenever you have a workout that's branded as a race predictor, it's almost always highly contrived. It doesn't have to be. You can do any kind of 800 meter repeat that's like 8 by 800, I think is what the Yassos are. So you can do any kind of 800 meter repeat workout and then draw the conclusion afterward that like this might predict this kind of race fitness. The problem is when you start the workout with, here's the pace I want to run the whole time, because that tells me I'm in this kind of shape for this marathon. That is what I mean when I say a highly contrived workout. That is never what you should do with interval workouts. Ever. And I'm going to explain that more in a minute. So anyway, it is the case that with 800 meter repeats that we're looking for, how do we need to use this workout to achieve the kind of training stimulus we want, because it can be a more flexible workout in that nature. And so as mentioned, the contrived dynamic is something we want to avoid, because what we're not trying to do here is we're not trying to say, I want to run these paces for all of these 800 meter repeats to achieve this result. Instead, we're trying to say, how hard should I be running to achieve this desired training result? And so as a consequence, it can be an effective leg strength, muscle recruitment workout, because you're going to be running a fair bit faster than you're doing like anything else. And if you're doing good fartlek workouts here and there, that's obviously going to be some of it, but a sustained interval workout helps drive that a little bit more. And so yes, the potential for that is there. Now, what we see when we cross the line now is from longer to shorter intervals is the change that we start to get into very high levels of neuromuscular activity and stimulus. And so when I'm talking about the need for things like sharpening up my running mechanics, increasing my running economy and such, when I'm looking for dynamics like increasing my race-ready speed and some of those things, then we start to think shorter repeats are the way to go. So, for example, 400 meters is one that people are doing a lot, and some combination of 10 by 15 by 20 by 400 meters or something. And part of the has anyone tried 3 by 20 by 400 meters? 60? It's in that book.
What?
That famous book about that famous runner. It was all made up because it was it's a novel. Once a runner. That's the famous workout in Once a Runner. Except he didn't know he was going to do 3 by 20, because the coach told him he was going to do 20 by 400. And then when he finished, the coach said, all right, do 20 more. And then when he finished, he said, all right, do 20 more. And then the coach left because it was too late at night, and he just let him do them by himself. So that's not what we're talking about here. Don't ever do that, by the way. It's stupid. Okay. 400 meter repeats are, by very nature, a chance to start really going fast without risking overdoing things, because they're short enough that a short and fast 400 can in fact be highly neuromuscular without being a risk of like being excessively fatiguing on your system, excessively anaerobic, for instance. So in that nature, you'll see 400 meter repeats quite a bit more in training schedules when you get into the later stages of the schedules, because that tends to be the time when it's effective to do them more, which we'll discuss in a moment when we summarize then interval workouts. So what people tend to do wrong with 400 meter repeat workouts is they take too little rest. And the reason why I say that tends to be wrong is because in most instances, the reason you're doing 400 meter repeats is to get a high level of activity. So you want to be going fast. But if you take too short of a rest, then you can't go quite as fast on the repeat. And as a consequence, it ends up being more like just a sustained strong effort with short rest breaks here, which, maybe that was something you were intending to do. But most of the time, that is not achieving anything more valuable than a sustained, like a tempo run or something.
And remember, we like to have good jogging in between. So I think a lot of times when people are doing shorter rests, they're stopping. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems like a lot of the short rests, people will stop. And it's better to do the 400, jog a 400, do another 400. And it's going to take a few minutes to do your rest in between each one. So that's also, it's going to take longer to do the workout. You're going to end up running more, but overall, it's a much better solution.
Yeah, and it begs the same question of, well, how many of them should we do? Because again, if the 400 is achieving a higher neuromuscular activity, a higher muscle recruitment stimulus, then we probably shouldn't be doing too many of them either. And so that's another thing where if I'm going to do 2400s, I'm not doing them quite as fast. If I'm doing 10 of them, I can go quite a bit faster with a decent amount of rest there. So what's the goal here? In most instances, you're going to be doing 400s for that kind of increased stimulus, and that's going to be a better way to achieve it. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I had a coach because my 400s weren't going great. He had me switch to 200s, and 200s can accomplish the very same thing.
Very same thing. In basically the same way. Yeah. And so in that kind of an instance, that adjustment that Hodge made was because the goal there was to get that high level of activity, like running fast. And she wasn't handling the running fast part for the whole 400 very well. And so then the question is, well, what do we do here? Do we just can the workout? Well, maybe we can still achieve the same end by just shortening the repeat, because in reality, remember, there's two categories of repeats here that we're basically talking about for an interval workout, longer and shorter, and they're largely accomplishing the same thing if they're in that category. So a 400-meter repeat workout and a 200-meter repeat workout are basically doing the same thing for you. So in most instances, if I can better achieve the goal by shortening the repeat, well, that's great. Might as well do it. Or some find that they can't get going any faster when they're doing a 200 than if they're doing a 400. So then it might be better to do the 400 because you're already not going any faster if you shorten the repeat. So there's some dynamics there. And what it really comes down to when we're talking about how best to use these types of workouts is it's very individual in nature. What do I need in this moment, depending on how things are going? That's going to define nuances like, should I do 400s or 300s or, that kind of stuff. But in all told, we use the shorter intervals for higher levels of neuromuscular activity. Now, that brings us to the third kind of aspect here. If there's longer repeat workouts and shorter repeat workouts, there's also combinations, like a ladder, for instance, or some kind of blend of repeats. And the purpose in most instances of workouts like that is to try to get the best of both worlds. And so you get some shorter stuff that's higher neuromuscular activity, some longer stuff that's leg strength, a little bit more leg strength focused and not as much high active state. And what it comes down to with those types of things is they can be valuable, but in most instances they are less efficient at achieving the training stimulus you want than simply doing the one type of workout one day and another type of workout another day. Or some other options potentially, because depending on the nature of what you need in the moment. Very rarely if we're doing a phased training approach, very rarely does a ladder workout make sense as the best choice in a given phase. It's usually one or another, depending on the moment in training.
May I be so bold as to suggest a combo that does work?
Okay. I don't know what you're going to say.
I know. Does it make you nervous?
A little bit.
I think it's better to do one workout and add strides than it is to try to do combinations. So for instance, you do a tempo or a steady state and you want to involve some neuromuscular, maybe you involve, well, it's probably better to do it actually on a non-workout day. But strides are the thing. If you feel like you need more neuromuscular work, they have very low cost on the rest of your training, but can accomplish a lot.
Strides meaning short sprints.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you were hinting at it though, Andy. In that instance, do it on a different day because it'll be more effective.
But I'm just saying, if you're feeling the need for more neuromuscular, it's better to add strides to your week than it is to try to combine a workout. Potentially,
yeah. Certainly, then so ladder workouts can be a great workout experience, but they are not necessarily, very rarely are they the most effective way to achieve those ends.
But maybe in your schedule it would be if you've talked to your coach, who knows? So we're not going to try to assume that we know all the details of your training.
It's possible. So let's kind of summarize now, because here what we've addressed is we've basically said, okay, for longer repeats, it's increased leg strength stimulus versus sustained hard efforts like tempos and steady runs. but it's not necessarily much more of a neuromuscular state than those other things, and you're most likely not trying to do it for anaerobic purposes. Shorter repeats, you're probably doing because it is a higher neuromuscular state, which is the goal difference from other types of workouts. And it's something that you don't get with largely anything else. So there's almost always going to be a place in every runner's training cycle. There's almost always a place for short repeat types of workouts, especially as you get close to like goal race season. So then what it comes down to is, when should I be doing these things in these phases we were just describing versus when should I not be doing them or doing them in certain ways? And that's where we're going to, okay, this is our like best recommendations for how and when you should use interval workouts to further your fitness, all right? And this is going to come from a number of sources, but especially enlightened by some recent interactions with Barry McGee and some of his descriptions of Lydiard's work as well. But let's first address when you should not do interval workouts, because there's a time in training when interval workouts are ineffective or less effective at a minimum and potentially detrimental as well. And the first and most important time is when you're building your musculoskeletal strength still, like you're just building up your base right now. That's a bad time for interval workouts.
Like Kate Gray says, strength before speed.
Yes.
Musculoskeletal strength before speed.
Yeah, and that's not, again, we have to always be careful here because there are ways of doing interval workouts that are useful in out of the norm types of things.
Like run walk. That's a type of interval.
That's a type of interval. Yeah, but I just mean even like some of the stuff we've described. There are ways of doing things. I'm not going to try to caveat every possible avenue because it's nearly infinite. But in general, what we described of most common uses of interval workouts, don't do that kind of stuff when you're building your base, and especially when you're just building up musculoskeletal strength, because it's highly risky, and interval workouts are horribly ineffective when you aren't already very strong, very well developed musculoskeletally. They're horribly ineffective. They tend to be detrimental because they make you need too much recovery time, and you can't build strength when your body's trying to rebuild yet. You need to recover and then you can rebuild or build more strength. So anyway, interval workouts, don't do them when you're base building type of stuff, pretty much ever. But then there's another time when they're really just not a great choice, and that's after you've built up that base, but now you're working on some aerobic conditioning types of things. That's also a bad time for interval workouts because they are not as effective. So now they can still be effective, but they're not as effective or as efficient as sustained strong effort types of things, with the exception of you don't want to only do sustained strong effort running all week long, every week for all of your hard efforts. You need something to have some more neuromuscular activity in there, and that's when we recommend doing a fartlek, which of course is a kind of interval workout, but it is entirely unstructured because you don't want to run that risk of I'm trying to hit certain paces for each of these repeats, or I'm just hitting repeats on the schedule, with like a minute or 2 minutes rest, and I'm hitting them every time. If a fartlek workout is done well, you don't time the rest. You run the repeats when you're feeling amply recovered. So in that point, interval workouts during conditioning work, when you're really building up your strong aerobic condition, are not as effective as other types of things. And so I simply just wouldn't use them. It's not that they would be bad, but you can get better results from other things. Okay? Mm-hmm. Was that soft enough, Andy? Wasn't harsh? Wasn't too harsh there?
I actually have something to add, though.
Okay, yeah, good. All right.
I would like to warn everyone to not use intervals to prove what pace they're capable of running.
Oh, that's such a such a bad approach.
Well, I've done it too. It's just so invigorating.
Explain more.
It's invigorating
Give us an example.
to like head down to the track and bring your race shoes, maybe bring some spikes if you're going to be hitting up the track for a season, and to let some 400s fly at the pace that you hope to do your mile.
You've done this before, I presume.
Yeah, I have. And so this is a warning to myself and to others that this is just not a great way to help ourselves move towards fitness, and also can be harmful to our ego, in fact, because we're able to, we're capable of doing a lot more in a race than we are in practice anyway. But then of course we set ourselves back to a lot of times when we're going out with that mentality. And I just see a lot of people very disappointed. Like, I didn't hit my paces for my workout. I didn't hit my paces, but that's not what it's about.
It's not what it's about. Also, it doesn't matter. It simply does not matter.
You're
hitting your paces.
You're growing your systems and you're getting fitter.
Here's a great question that a lot of people will ask us. Well, they'll say things like, well, how do I know what pace I should run for my race? And of course, you just set yourself up to be knocked down when you ask us that question. Because the immediate answer is, who cares what pace you're running for your race? It doesn't matter. The point is you're trying to run as much as your body can produce in a given moment, and pace isn't going to tell you that. So stop running from paces. You need to run the right amount of effort to get what you can get out of your body. And of course the question comes up, well, I need to hit a certain pace to qualify for Boston. And the answer is no, you don't. You need to be fit enough to run fast enough to qualify for Boston. And it doesn't matter if you can hit a certain pace if you are fit enough to do it and execute the fullest effort possible. Okay, so you got to train that. You got to be able to do it. But that's not the point of our conversation right now. Because what we want to do then here is say, when should you use interval workouts? Because we've talked about when you shouldn't, and now you're starting to feel down in the dumps on intervals. Maybe I should never be doing those. And of course, the answer is no. You should certainly do them. They're wonderful when they're used to achieve these right kinds of ends at the right time. So first, when you are strong, musculoskeletal development is good. When your aerobic system is well conditioned, then your body is ready to achieve high results from interval workouts. So keep that in mind. The reason we're waiting to do them is not because they can't give us something positive earlier on. It's because our body is not yet in a state when it can achieve the best possible results from an interval workout until we're strong, musculoskeletal wise, we're well developed aerobically. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've attended to those things, then interval workouts are an exceptional way to increase the muscle recruitment, the leg strength factor in ways above and beyond what we've been doing all that time. And so then we use interval workouts. And what interval workouts do we use? Well, it depends on a number of things, but long intervals first. And they can be longer or shorter. That's kind of up to you, as long as they're in the category of longer intervals. So I would say 800-meter repeats and above. But of course, if you're doing 750, it's probably still long. And if you're doing 1,000, it's, so anyway. So long intervals, when you've established those things, can be effective, because now we're talking about being able to increase leg strength stuff. But they need to be either. There's an either or here. They need to be short enough that it's a substantial enough difference in training stimulus. Because if you're doing repeats that are basically the same training stimulus as your long sustained running, then you should do the long sustained running, because it's going to be still a more effective way to do things unless you're increasing the efforts more. So either you're doing it fast enough, so probably a little bit shorter, you're not going to be doing like 2-mile repeats or something, or do them on hills.
He's so pleased.
I'm so pleased. Good. This is not coming from me. So here's what Barry McGee says. He says, I basically don't ever tell people to do flat intervals anymore. I have them do all their interval workouts on hills. You can be training for a marathon, for a 5K, for a mile on the track. And he's like, I'm having you do your interval workouts on hills. And so, of course, why? Well, isn't the goal for intervals in large part things like increased leg strength, neuromuscular activity, and even potentially anaerobic development, right? Well, all three of those are better or easier to achieve going uphill than running on flat. So your leg strength, certainly, that rule it out. If that's the goal, you should be doing these interval workouts on hills, because you're going to get a higher leg strength stimulus trying to push up a hill, the drive. Neuromuscular wise, we'll come back to that, Andy. She's got a rebuttal. Neuromuscular wise, you have to increase your leg drive to go up the hill. So once again, it's also increasing some of the neuromuscular stimulation too.
But you have to be ready for it, like Zach said, because there are many injuries that are not.
We've already established this,
but
Andy.
I'm saying, for instance, anyone out there who is nursing a labrum tear and has rehabbed it should be wary of hills.
Well, yeah, if you're not fully healthy or you haven't trained
that is something,
yet.
though, but that's something that you can work through in PT and have it be there for years. So I'm saying this because I have come from a place where not everything's perfect. Like I know people who struggle with knee stuff because they have a tear that hasn't been operated on because it's a small enough tear that it, so we just have to be very careful because hills obviously there's going to be more pounding.
Well, less in fact, because you're going uphill as opposed to running
down.
flat.
But
you're not going fast on the down.
But you still have to go down. So.
Yeah, right. Now, so Andy's caveat is like, if you're too fragile to run hills, don't run them. And of course, if you're not healthy enough or you're in a state where it's detrimental to do a thing, don't do it. So yeah, I'm gonna agree.
I avoided them when I had a known labrum tear for the Olympic trials. So
known. What's an unknown labrum tear feel like?
Well, if you
I'm kidding. Okay, so. That's one consideration. Now, that's an extreme. I don't actually necessarily advise every time you do an interval workout doing them on hills. But insofar as when I am doing strength building intervals, hills are more effective for that. So that's the option that I'm thinking about there. Now, the next layer here is if you're preparing for specific races and so I'm getting close to race date, interval workouts are going to be a key piece in the puzzle then, an essential piece in the puzzle because you want that increased neuromuscular activity, but you also want to be able to recover even more quickly between workouts. And so long sustained hard efforts are no longer the most effective option, and they're not as stimulating neuromuscular wise. And so that's where we're doing short interval types of things. And especially like the 200s and 400s that I can do really fast and plenty of rest so that I am not burning my legs out. Don't do too many of them so that I'm not just dead afterward and then need to recover for 3 days, but kind of finding the balance of fast and not too many. And then, of course, just in general, that race-ready dynamic. So there's certainly a running economy, running efficiency piece there, but also depending on the kind of race that you're doing, that it becomes even more imperative. So like for marathoners, you don't really need to spend a lot of time doing it. A couple of weeks. 2 weeks might be just fine. If you're racing 5K, then it might be more valuable to have 4 to 6 weeks of time that you're spending doing interval types of things. So it can depend on the race as well.
Well, you wanted to know about fartleks, so I hope that you wanted to know about intervals too. So this is we're hoping that this is the kind of information that you're looking for from us, but we're never going to know unless you ask your questions and you interact with us about this content. So please let us know if this interval conversation was helpful to you.
Well, also it should be noted that in asking a question, you can provide the specific context in your situation, and understanding that everything we just said is a very generalized version of describing interval workouts and their uses. And so we can even more directly speak to a situation where it can, the nuances can define a lot and when to do what and such. So that's good. Excellent. Well, let's get on to the world of running. Well, in the world of running, to start things off with some A to Z runners who will very soon be sporting the flashy garb that you see on your screen right now, or things like it. And a couple of runners racing this past weekend. So shout out to Kathy, who ran a 10-mile race.
Very strong.
And yeah, a great story about kicking it in the finish too. It's always fun and exciting.
And not looking at her watch and going by effort. Ran very strong.
And congrats to Hannah for a strong 5K race as well.
Awesome. Speaking of strong races, some of our previous podcast guests made the podium at the USATF Road 10-Mile Championships. It was held in conjunction with the Medtronic TC 10-Mile. And in the men's race, we're going to start off with that. By halfway, there were only 8 athletes in the mix, including Bias Mbasa, Sam Chalenga, Shadrach Kipchirchir, and Hillary Bohr. And
wait, the steeplechaser?
Yes, Hillary Bohr, who's been on our podcast. He's an Olympic steeplechaser ×2, and he's a champion, a U.S. champion. So he is decorated on the track. Great to see him on the roads running so strong. In fact,
what?
Spoiler alert, he was the winner of the race, Hillary Bohr.
10-mile champ, all right.
But it wasn't without competition from other previous podcast guest, Sam Chalenga, who is very good on the roads and has been pretty much on most podiums, I would say. Yeah, he's on the podium quite often. And Bohr and Chalenga separated from that group by mile 8. So in the end, it was Boer who beat Chilenga to win in a time of, wait for it, 46:06.
Ooh, 46:06 in a 10 mile. So we're talking about 436-ish.
That's
436 pace.
That's on the fly math. So
Wow.
yeah,
It's very fast.
it's very fast. So fast, in fact, that he broke the course record set by Chip Chirchir in 2018 by 28 whopping seconds.
That's quick.
Chilenga, of course, was in second and ran 46:14, which that means he was also faster than the previous record. And Simbasa was 46:29
For third?
for third
Solid.
place. Yep.
That's an exciting race.
Yeah,
So
very
Hillary Boer,
exciting.
champ, U.S. champ on the track, and now U.S. champ on the roads as well. And that's just, that
pretty
just
fun.
speaks
Yeah.
well of his future in the sport continuing to develop. That's good.
On the women's side, it started at a very fast pace, led by Fiona O'Keefe and Emily Durgan. You've heard those names for the road quite a bit. By halfway, the lead pack had dwindled down to about 6 athletes, and then by mile 8, Fiona was alone. And she ended up winning in a time of 51:24, knocking 20 seconds off of Molly Huddle's previous record from 2015.
Wow.
Yes.
So while we're on the bandwagon of Zach randomly calculating paces in his head on the fly, that's like 5:09.
That's so
pace.
fast.
That's blazing.
I would love to do one of those. So
Wow.
yeah, Annie Frisbee finished second and Emily Durgan took third. So very strong finish for that 10-mile road racing championships. And then moving on to Twin Cities Marathon. So this is combined in an event weekend for Twin Cities. There was a very impressive PR from the winner on the women's side.
Wow.
Jessica Wachitowski. Is that how you?
That was nice. We'll go with it.
Of Colorado Springs was the women's winner, and she ran a 2:33:09, which was a 7-minute PR for her in the event.
That is impressive.
That's an impressive amount of time to take off your marathon.
For anybody of
For
any
anyone,
level,
yes.
that is a huge
Yep.
PR.
This is only her second marathon.
Oh,
I
wow.
feel I should add. She
She
did
should
run
do a
the
third.
2020.
She should do a third. She's on a roll.
Well, she ran in the 2020 Olympic Trials Marathon. I'm guessing she qualified
that
with
was
the
her
half
first. Oh, yeah,
marathon.
okay.
Yeah, so this is only her second marathon. And she also qualified in the 10K on the track. So this woman has some serious speed. She's obviously talented. But this was, like I said, only her second marathon, and to be able to cut down to 2:33.
So in the context, now that we have the full context, it's actually not that surprising that she could run 2:33, given how fast she's run a 10K on the track and the fact that 2:40 was at the Atlanta trials
That's
race,
true.
which was itself not
So,
a PR
Are we allowed
course
to
type
take like
experience.
10 minutes off of that?
That would be nice.
I'd like to know. Yeah, so that was really impressive. And then Kim Conley also hit the marathon Olympic trials qualifier as well. And
Also
she's usually on the track,
a track
so
star, yeah.
it's fun to see her on the roads for the marathon. The men's winner was 25-year-old Yuya Yoshida from Japan in a time of 2:11:28. So pretty fast day.
Fast day indeed. Speaking of fast and incredible days, the next majors marathon in the circuit of majors this fall was London Marathon, just now completed, and it did not disappoint. So if you recall, we were kind of talking this one up in particular because on the women's side especially, it was like a perfect combination of really competitive and very fast people.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of hoping for something, magical.
And something magical did happen despite the favorite not being there.
Right. World record holder.
Yep, Bridget Kosgei. She was not able to run due to, I believe, some injury stuff. So she wasn't in the race. It proved to be a fast race even still. And I want to give you a little bit of a talk through because it's interesting. The 20th mile was the slowest for the lead pack in 5:38. And when it slowed, Yellowsmith Yawala fell over a speed bump. She was in the back of that group that slowed.
Oh.
So I don't know. I wasn't able to see that moment to know like exactly how that played. Like if it slowed so much that she wasn't able to see the speed bump because she made too much contact with the women in front of her. I'm not really sure. But she fell behind by 20 meters.
Yikes.
She quickly got back up and caught the leaders again. But after that, Yawala ran a 2:43. 24th mile.
24th mile.
24th mile is her fastest mile of the race by far. And broke her competitors' wills. Just
hey, you got 3
broke
miles
them.
to go. What does it feel like to run world-class mile time in the third to last mile of the marathon? Whoa.
Isn't that amazing? I just loved that
Yeah.
little backstory, or that, I guess not that backstory, that in-race story. And then Uwala, in this race, became the youngest woman to ever win the London Marathon.
Oh, wow.
She's 23.
She is 23?
She's 23.
Wow.
Yeah, her winning time was 2:17:36. And you'll remember that she owns the fastest debut marathon in history. She ran that in April in Hamburg. So she just came off of that really fast debut and showed us that she's got the stuff again,
To win
yet
a
again,
majors.
to
That's-
win a
yeah.
major marathon. She is one to be watching. And then, the defending champion was also in the race. Jocelyn Kepkazgai. She took second in 2:18:07. So it was a fast race. Third was Almu Mergutu in 2:18:32.
So speaking of fast race, because it gets more historic than that. So now Andy has just mentioned 3 women who have run roughly 2:18 or faster, which has never happened before in a race. But it was more than that. 4 women ran under 2:19, the top 4, which has never happened before in a race of any kind
Like a single
that women
race.
have done. Yep. So that's something. But then also the top 6 broke 2:20, which previously the best who had ever run under 2:20 was like 4, which Berlin Marathon did last weekend, tie the previous best that London Marathon had happened a couple years ago. So what we're looking at here is we're basically 2 weekends in a row of record-setting performances in terms of depth of field for world-class women marathoners, and it just keeps getting better because we still have Chicago Marathon coming up too.
I tell you, fall is fast. These were great temps.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're living in the fastest era of running ever. But also, these are some really great temperatures and conditions for these runners.
It really
I heard
has been
from
quite
both.
nice,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's been great. So if you're running a fall marathon soon, I'm hoping that you're also going to get that same kind of weather.
We're crossing our fingers for everyone running Chicago next
Yes,
weekend.
yes.
Hope it's not like last year.
Tigis Sefa, who we talked about last week, she ran 2:15:37 to win Uwala's Ethiopian record in Berlin. So we have all of these really fast runners that are competitive right now, that are running their very best right now. Bridget Kosgei, even though she's injured, she's also part of that list.
She ran 2:16 back in the spring.
Yep. Perez Chepchirchir has won her last 5 marathons, including the
champ.
Olympics.
Yep.
Yes, New York and Boston. So it's just really exciting. Women's running is really on the rise with the best in history by far. So very exciting time to be a fan of the sport.
You know, one of the interesting things about that is people often talk about, we need to see all of them race each other. Like, how cool would it be to just, especially if everyone's healthy and having a good cycle and things like that. So, of course, naturally, the answer to that is, well, they intentionally are not all racing each other.
They want to win money.
Yes, because it dilutes the chance of winning the prize purses. And it's not just that, but also the races have to pay these runners money to show up at their race.
Appearance
They
fees.
are very expensive to get to come to your race. So if you're the Chicago Marathon, you can't afford to pay 10 of the best world-class runners to come and run the race at one time. You need like 3 of them, or maybe. And so as the result goes, they rarely ever see a race where all the best runners run against each other in the marathon. It happens, of course, all the time in track. Because the championship level racing, that's pretty much always going to happen.
Yeah, the
every year.
Diamond League, everyone's brought together.
But
week
for the
after week.
marathon, even at the championship level stuff, the world championships and the Olympic marathon, you still don't see it for a myriad reasons. One, simply being because the athletes don't make very much money at those championships, and they can make way more running the world majors. And so as a consequence, many of the athletes would rather run a majors than a world championships. And the Olympic probably has the added prestige, and so more are going to run that one rather than like trade off for the money at a majors or something. However, countries can only have 3 athletes from their country represented there. And
Yeah.
as it always happens, some of the best marathoners in the world don't end up getting selected for their team because whether they weren't having quite as great of a season as some others in their country, or because of the selection process, they just missed it because of some kind of situation that caused, an issue that prevented it.
Or there's so much depth.
Yes, well, that's
and
just
they would
it.
have
There
been
is
one
so
of the
much
best,
depth.
but their country,
Right.
men and women are better.
Right. So
Yeah,
as
that's
it goes, it basically is this. If you could let 10 marathoners from Kenya and Ethiopia run in the Olympics, then we probably would be able to see a race where everyone from all the countries plus the best depth from the most deep countries, and we'd see a race eventually. But that just never happens as a result. So we hope for more of those head-to-head, things.
Paris 2024, I'm hoping is going to be really exciting for us all to watch. Now, we would be remiss not to mention the men as well, although the women's side was such a hype.
Yep, true.
So now this is a great race, but probably not quite as exciting as the women's.
Well, coming off the men's race last weekend with the world record, too, it's not
Amos
bad.
Kipruto of Kenya won in a time of 2:04:39, and he broke the race in open at 24 miles. Is when he started to put the hammer down. Lul Gebrselassie of Ethiopia earned silver in 2:05:12, and Belgian Bashir Abdi ran third in 2:05:19.
Wow.
And it was an interesting race. I guess the first half went out slower than the pacer was prescribed. So that was kind of interesting. And only 7 was able to go with the lead pack, even though it was slower than the prescribed pace. It was at 1:02:14 that they came through. And it did include in the group Kenenisa Bekele. Yes, legendary.
Recently turned masters.
And that is the news. That's the big news from the men's side. He broke the Masters world record. 40-year-old Bekele finished 5th in 2:05:53. And he broke the previous Masters record that was 2:06:25. So that was a pretty significant chunk he took out of that record. And that was previously held by Ayad Lamdesem of Spain earlier this year is when he set that. So, yep.
That's an interesting one. Kenenisa Bekele has broken many world records in his life, track and road. And as it goes, he, now being 40 years old, can tap into these Masters marks as well, which opened some new doors for him too. But at the same time, it was only 3 years ago that he ran 2 seconds slower than Kipchoge's world record in the marathon.
What was it? 2:01.
2:01:41 is what Bekele ran. And so, 3 years ago, he ran 2:01:41. You can't imagine that he's not capable of getting reasonably close to that still right now.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of exciting to see, well, how fast could he set a Masters record?
That
and
record
just in time for Kipchoge to
Kipchoge.
start knocking on that door.
How old is he? 38?
Yeah, he needs 2 more years here, 2 more
Okay.
years in a few days or something. So, yes, but it's exciting because, you like to see a runner like Bekele is a very rare thing to have a career as long as he has had at the level he has been able to compete. There's only a few others in history, in fact, who have done that. Kipchoge being one of them. And so it's kind of fun to see at this stage in things, how he continues on.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. Well, speaking of exciting, we're excited about all the running you're doing. And like Zach said, all the questions that you're asking on the A to Z Running podcast. We love to connect with you. So please keep doing so.
AtoZrunning.com/question is the easiest place to ask a question if you would like to share your thoughts and hear ours in return. But comment in all the places. If it's, you're on a social media and following there, that's a good spot for things like that. And anywhere else that you find our content. And if you didn't notice because you weren't watching, go to YouTube to watch this episode so you can see these super awesome shirts that we're wearing. These ones are the half zip jacket, or I think it's actually called a quarter zip jacket. Yeah, so we've got some long sleeves, we've got some short sleeves, we've got some hooded, we've got some zipped, and all of that can be available to you if you get there soon enough at AtoZrunning.com/shop.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.